Today will be your last day at Halcyon. Lisa, the deputy head of HR, looked me straight in the eye. The board has decided to restructure several departments. Sitting next to her was Patrick Kruger, the chief finance officer, the same man who'd twice called my financial control system too convoluted. He gave a slight nod, said nothing. In his hands, a termination letter, a modest severance package, and a non-disclosure agreement. I said one thing. I understand. No outrage, no reaction. I'd seen this coming weeks ago. I'm Lucas Rivers, former chief accountant at Halcyon for 15 years. I built the internal cash flow monitoring system. I was the first to flag irregular expenses paid to a so-called financial strategy consulting firm based out of a mailbox in Florida. The warning was ignored. After that, I was quietly removed from budget approvals. Lost my Level 2 access. No longer included in Kruger's weekly financial briefings. For months, I became a ghost in the company. Known, but invisible. Not a single financial task was assigned to me. I stepped out of the meeting room. No one looked at me for more than 3 seconds. Some lowered their eyes. Some pretended to be busy. A few junior analysts I had mentored actively avoided eye contact. They already knew. News travels fast on the finance floor. I opened my filing cabinet and took only what mattered, a fountain pen. The first internal report ever flagged as high-risk anomaly, and a black notebook where I had diagrammed the company's cash flow patterns over the years, pages no one had ever bothered to ask about. As I walked down the corridor, I passed the executive boardroom, its lights still on. Through the glass, I saw Kruger pointing at a chart outlining the upcoming Q4 IPO strategy. Beneath the title, Strategic Asset Optimization, was a perfectly clean growth curve, polished like a magic trick. I smiled. They think they've eliminated me, but they've forgotten. I'm the one who wrote the original control lines, and I still have the copies. I returned to my old appartement just before midnight. The room wasn't large, but quiet enough to hear the clock ticking steadily on the wall. I turned on my old laptop. The internal reconciliation tool I once built for Halcyon was still there. Long outdated, now obsolete since they overhauled the system. This version wasn't supposed to be used anymore. I began tracing transactions from 3 years back. Every transfer, every reference code, every suspicious expense buried under vague labels like strategic support or regional market research. All of it pointed to one name, Helix Partners, a so-called financial consulting firm with no registered office, no working contact, and most importantly, no independent audit trail. I widened the scope. Over $4.2 million had been funneled there, split into carefully timed, smaller payments, just low enough to avoid triggering internal alerts. I checked the approvals. Every transaction carried the same ID tag, KR17. Kruger! I wasn't shocked, but my throat still tightened. He had once smiled at me in our first meeting, when I was appointed chief accountant. "We don't need the best," he said. "Just someone who knows how to keep order." I'd thought he was trying to encourage me. I dug into the old system's access logs. Something felt off. Kruger's approval codes didn't follow the legacy security format. The digits were masked, subtly, cleverly, fake enough that anyone else would have thought they were real. But I recognized them for what they were. Fabricated digital shadows, built to bypass cross-check validation. I collected everything. Every transaction, every timestamp, every altered line of data. I didn't have access to the new system, so I couldn't verify the full scope. But with this old foundation, I could still map the path of the money. And what emerged wasn't carelessness. It was calculated diversion. And the man at the helm was Kruger. I opened my notebook, logged every detail. For the first time, I had enough to act. No one asked me to do this, but silence would make me complicit. And I know better than anyone, in accounting, the most dangerous number isn't the one that's wrong. It's the one made to look right. I picked up my phone, not sure if he still used that number, but I typed and hit send without hesitation. You have 10 million reasons to meet me. No punctuation, no explanation. The message went out at 3:41 a.m. I thought I'd have to wait until late morning, or maybe get no reply at all. But less than 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Not a call, just one line. 26th floor conference room. 6 மணி 15 நிமிடம். Henry Calderon, chairman of Halcyon's board of directors. Most employees only knew him from the framed portrait in the main lobby. I had met him a few times when I was chief accountant during early year budget reviews. Always composed, spoke little, but never once looked like he didn't know exactly where he was sitting. I arrived 10 minutes early. The conference room was still dark. The only light came from the ash-gray sky outside the wide glass wall. The city hadn't fully awakened. Street lamps still flickered. I sat in silence, not as if I'd come to sound the alarm, but to test one final thing, whether anyone at Halcyon was still awake enough to hear the truth. When Calderon entered, he didn't look at me right away. He took off his glasses, set them gently on the table, and sat across from me. No secretary, no assistant. Ms. Rivers, Mr. Calderon. I didn't waste time. I placed a slim folder and a plastic-wrapped USB on the table. I'm not here to ask for my job back, and I'm not here to accuse anyone. I'm here because this system is leaking from the inside. And if Halcyon goes public in its current state, you won't just lose your reputation. You'll lose control. It was the first time he looked directly at me since walking in. He didn't ask how I got any of this. He simply opened the folder, plugged the USB into his laptop, and started reading, calm, unflinching. I sat still, watching his face. After a moment, he gave a slow nod. Kruger? All identifier codes lead back to him, but he's not acting alone. I pointed to the flowchart, how funds pass through layers of shell expenses, lining up eerily with the period when Halcyon began facing internal market pressure. Calderon didn't write anything, just tapped lightly on the table. He didn't need confirmation. He was weighing risk, and I knew, at his level, the greatest risk was doing nothing. Why not send this to external auditors? He asked. Because they're using the same modified system. No one else can see the deep layer like I can. Calderon leaned back. Morning light finally slipped through the glass, catching the lines at the corners of his eyes, creases not shaped by age, but by decisions. I want you in tomorrow's high-level internal briefing. I'm no longer with Halcyon. You're the only one who still remembers how Halcyon was built. I nodded, not because he convinced me, but because he understood what he was sitting on. When I stepped out of that room, sunlight had just touched the mirrored towers in the distance. The silence inside me no longer felt like the shame of someone cast aside. It was the quiet of someone who knew the game had just shifted. The boardroom sat on the top floor, tucked behind 2 layers of soundproof glass and a hallway lined with old financial posters no one looked at anymore. The long oval table was still there, oak-polished, gleaming under the ceiling lights, the place where million-dollar decisions had once been made with nothing more than a nod. I stood at the head of the table. No slideshow, no handouts, just a USB and a neatly clipped folder. Calderon sat silently at the far end, hands folded in front of him, watching not just me, but the entire room. Some of the people here were former colleagues. Head of legal, internal compliance, the one who used to call me Lucas, the heartbeat of cash flow. No one smiled. A few looked at me like I was a variable they hadn't accounted for. I didn't give a speech. I didn't accuse anyone. I opened my laptop and began projecting system access logs from accounts with top-tier clearance, approval commands all signed under the same ID, without dual authentication, payment streams from Halcyon to entities with no audit records, and a web of legal ties, thin but traceable, showing how the money was being routed outward. Helix Partners, Bright Axis, and a few others are shell companies, I said calmly. They share the same legal representative, same tax registration address in the Cayman Islands, and I hit enter. The ownership diagram appeared. They share the same ultimate funding source, Orion Capital. The boardroom fell into a vacuum silence. A man to my left shifted, tapping his fingers, a reflex he always had when annoyed. Across the table, a woman opened her mouth to ask something, then froze at the approval chain slide. Kruger's name, repeating so many times it looked like a rhythm. A voice finally broke the quiet. "Are you certain this data hasn't been tampered with?" I turned. It was Mr. Fletcher, head of strategic investments. The classic question, never a full denial, just enough doubt, timed just right. I didn't argue. I changed the slide. These are system logs from the legacy platform I personally built. The falsified identifier strings have been independently verified. Full backup copies were submitted to Chairman Calderon earlier this morning. I looked at him, not with defiance, just steady conviction. If verification is needed, I'm prepared to cross-check with any third party. But I didn't come here to convince anyone to believe me. I came to present what cannot be denied. Only then did Calderon speak, brief but decisive. I've reviewed it all. The data matches, the patterns align. And most important, those financial movements could not have happened by accident. No vote was needed. Everyone in the room understood what had just been confirmed. Kruger is suspended, effective immediately, Calderon said. A special audit task force will be formed. And, he turned to me, Ms. Rivers will assist directly. No one else understands the old framework like she does. I nodded, not out of gratitude. I hadn't come back to be acknowledged. I came back because something needed to be fixed. Someone exhaled, a sound like waking from a deep sleep. But I knew better. That sleep hadn't come from ignorance. It came from choosing not to know. I returned to the data archive in the basement, a place most employees had forgotten even existed. There, between rows of dust-covered servers and wall-mounted drives, sat the original system framework I had once built for Halcyon, before it was enhanced for speed over transparency. I reconnected through an old, technical sub-account once issued to the audit team. They thought it had been deactivated, but I knew nothing in a system truly disappears if its creator hasn't deleted it. The first layer held the obvious, known transactions to Helix Partners, the unaudited consulting partner. But I wanted deeper, into the areas with no tags, no dashboards. cold strings of data that only revealed themselves if you knew exactly what to search for. I filtered for approvals time-stamped outside working hours, a simple but effective cover. That's when I found them, a series of payments with no clear sign-off. All were authorized by a single, strange internal ID, JKR1. Not Kruger. A replica. I opened the account creation log. JKR1 had been activated from an unregistered device, masked behind a proxy IP, and used solely to approve payments. It wasn't listed in the HR system, no payroll ID, no departmental link. A company name surfaced in the beneficiary list, Sable Metrics, one I had never seen before. No audit trail, no registered partnership contracts. I traced the tax ID, and one name came up as the account founder, Nathan Kruger. I stopped, stared at the name on the gray screen, no flashing, no emphasis, none needed. I knew it well. The CFO's cousin, a former investment advisor, and now a strategic stakeholder in Orion Capital. The latest payment to Sable was for $312,000, labeled Valuation Consulting. I cross-referenced the date with Halcyon's internal IPO timeline, and it matched precisely with when market pressure began closing in. The network was revealing itself. No longer speculation, no longer theory, but a logical sequence, traceable step by step. I opened the leather-bound notebook I'd been carrying since the day I was fired. I didn't type this into a file, didn't take screenshots, didn't upload anything to a server. I wrote it by hand, every figure, every connection, every timestamp, as if this investigation wasn't for a court of law, but for conscience. Footsteps echoed faintly from the hallway outside, but I didn't turn. I knew, deep within the system's layers, the most dangerous element wasn't the flow of money. It was the names no longer in the official structure, yet still pulsing through the company's bloodstream. I almost overlooked the name. A single technical note buried in the system upgrade log. Project executed by J. Broom, implementation consultant. No employee ID. No contract in the legal database. No internal emails. I pulled up the access change logs, the exact moment I was removed from the system. The day I received the email stating, Lucas Rivers access is no longer required during the restructuring phase. And right there, at the bottom of the log, the name J. Broom appeared in the final line. Admin override. Revoke access. User. Errorverse. I sat still for a long time after reading that line. Not out of surprise, but because of the familiarity. Like hearing a voice you've definitely heard before, but can't quite place. I opened an external consultant database, the archive tracking third-party specialists who had worked with Halcyon. Jason Broom wasn't on any list. But digging deeper, through an independent commercial trace system, his name surfaced in a different record. Chroma Labs, a tech company that had once been rapidly acquired by Orion Capital. Jason Broom had served as Director of Systems Integration there. Around the same time Chroma was gutted and sold off, Broom vanished from the executive records, marked as departed for personal reasons. I don't believe in neutral footnotes. No one departs right after revoking an entire company's internal control access unless they're finishing the job someone hired them to do. I pulled up a copy of Halcyon's platform before Broom intervened. The code edits were subtle, authentication functions pushed to a lower layer, critical logs overwritten with truncated versions. If I hadn't built the system myself, no one would have noticed. Jason Broom wasn't a technical consultant. He was the gatekeeper, the one who cleared the way for Kruger to build a shadow control system. And he didn't work alone. This model was too precise, too clean. It required coordination, technical, financial, and internal political will. I wrote his name in my notebook, not at the top, but right beneath Kruger, a sublayer in a larger operation. That's when it hit me. What I was tracing wasn't just a series of violations. It was a recurring restructuring model, reused across companies, across years, with different players, but always one objective: to make a firm vulnerable at the precise moment of valuation. A takeover not through force, but by making the victim open the door from the inside. I closed my laptop, and quietly, at the bottom of the notebook page, I wrote, Kruger wasn't alone, and this is no longer just Halcyon's story. The meeting was called for 6 p.m., after most of the office lights had gone dark. No internal announcement, no official invites, just a single encrypted message sent to each board member. Urgent. Conference room 4. No proxies allowed. I entered the room after Calderon. No handshakes, no greetings. The air in the dark, wood-paneled space felt thick, like a closed-door hearing. Kruger wasn't there. I didn't ask why. I knew he'd been suspended. And I suspected, like Jason Broom, he was already out of contact. I began the presentation. No flashy graphics, just money flows. Each installment routed out, every shell company, each legal name used as a placeholder, and the branching network of equity paths that, all, in the end, led back to one destination: Orion Capital. I pointed to the third chart. Each time, Halcyon reached a milestone in IPO prep. There was a round of outbound transfers. Small, but consistent. And the timing matches down to the week. One board member, Ms. Morgan, head of legal oversight, sat up straighter. You're suggesting valuation manipulation? I looked at her. No nod, no denial. I simply advanced to the next slide. Internal value assessments from third-party firms, each showing a subtle dip in projected worth after the payouts, despite stable revenue. Calderon laced his fingers together. His eyes no longer followed the screen. He was watching the room. We've been unlocked from the inside, he said slowly. A portion of company assets has been siphoned in a way we can't control, at the very moment we needed transparency most. A younger man, newly appointed from a partner investment fund, spoke up. Do we have enough to go public with this? The press? The shareholders? They'll demand answers. Calderon shook his head. We don't chase headlines. We move before the law does. Then he turned to me. Ms. Rivers, can you verify that all this data is original? I nodded. I haven't altered anything. It's all been backed up and cross-referenced against the legacy system and access logs. A brief silence followed. But this time, it wasn't the silence of denial. It was the silence of reckoning. Then another voice, Mr. Park, who had overseen the IPO strategy from the beginning. I noticed a few anomalies, but I stayed quiet. I'm not sure. I deserve to still be sitting here. No one replied, but Calderon gave a slow nod, not of forgiveness, but of acceptance. The kind that says, now is the time to rebuild the wall. Calderon looked at me, then turned to the entire room. We halt the IPO, effective immediately, and we report everything to the Securities Commission. No one objected. No applause followed. Only silent glances exchanged between people who once believed they were inside an unbreachable fortress. I gathered my files. No one walked me to the door. But as the heavy wooden door closed behind me, I knew something larger had collapsed. Not with a crash, but with acknowledgement. The hearing room was on the 10th floor of the Federal Securities Commission headquarters. Modest, unadorned, But everyone who'd ever sat in the witness chair knew this wasn't a place for emotional narratives. It required one thing: truth. I walked in exactly on time. Not early, not late. My hair tied back, a plain gray suit, no badges, no title. I wasn't representing Halcyon. I didn't call myself a whistleblower. I was simply a former chief accountant, carrying a notebook, a copy of the data, and a clear memory of how a system could be bent so far out of shape that no one noticed it breaking. Ms. Lucas Rivers, one of the three lead investigators, began. Please describe, to the best of your knowledge, how Halcyon's internal financial structure was altered over the past 2 years. I didn't look at notes. I didn't need to. I had rewritten what needed to be said every night, in my notebook, in my mind, and eventually, in silence. I can't speak to motive. I can only describe the method, the way an accounting system was restructured to allow funds to exit the company without passing through independent review, using fabricated personnel IDs and a re-engineered technical hierarchy designed externally beyond audit oversight. A lawyer to the left interjected, "When you say designed externally, do you mean by whom?" I didn't give names. I didn't have to. The names mattered less than the roles: the coder, the approver, the person who crafted false data layers to mask the flow of money. They didn't act alone. This was a coordinated structure. I presented the flow chart, shell entities, disbursements disguised under valuation strategy categories, camouflaged well enough to pass 2 rounds of standard audits. No one pushed back. No papers rustled in frantic rebuttal, like in courtroom dramas. Just the quiet tap of keyboards and eyes locked on a screen, where the network diagram lit up like the circuitry of a heart pumping blood the wrong way. "I didn't come here to condemn anyone," I said. "I came to show you that if a system is adjusted deep enough, millions of dollars can disappear without a trace, as long as everyone involved plays their part." No one needed more explanation. When the hearing ended, a reporter was waiting in the hallway. "Ms. Rivers, just one question. Do you think Halcyon can recover from this?" I didn't stop, didn't flinch, and I didn't answer. As the elevator doors opened, a commission aide leaned in and whispered, "A few networks want to interview you. 60 Minutes, Bloomberg. They say you sound like someone who survived something." I looked at him calmly. "I don't need a stage. I just need the system to know it has a breach. And this time, someone finally woke up." The elevator closed, and I left the building exactly as I had entered it. Not loud, not quoted, but I knew some chairs in that hearing room would never sit still again. The news arrived on a Monday morning, quiet as the first wind of the season brushing past the kitchen window. No press conference, no damage control tweet storm. Just a brief notice on the securities registry system. Orion Capital withdraws acquisition bid for Halcyon Capital. Reason: portfolio adjustment. They phrased it like it was a simple financial decision. But anyone who had seen behind the curtain knew this deal could no longer happen. Not after the system had been exposed. Not after the data spoke louder than any accusation. Halcyon retained control. The stock price stabilized, then slowly recovered. Some celebrated, others stayed silent. As for Kruger, according to the update I received, he was formally indicted. Charges: financial fraud and conspiracy to manipulate market valuation. The names once tied to shady approval chains began disappearing from the org chart. No alarms, no public apologies, just quiet updates marked "no longer with the company." Calderon called me the following week. He didn't justify. He didn't plead. He asked just one question. Would you consider returning, this time, with full authority over transparency and controls? I interrupted him gently, but firmly. I don't return to places that use "thank you" to mask a push out the door. There was no bitterness in my voice. I had made peace in my own way, but I hadn't forgotten, and I wasn't coming back for recognition. A week later, I received a firm envelope embossed with the insignia of the Federal Securities and Exchange Commission. No flourish, no flowery signatures, just a simple appointment letter. We need someone like you, someone who understands the system from within and has the will to protect it. Role: strategic, pre-IPO compliance advisor. I didn't smile. I wasn't surprised. I just folded the letter and tucked it into my old leather notebook, the one that had followed me through every backup, every sleepless night, every layer of reversed code. And beneath the final note I had written about Kruger, I added a single line. The network is severed. A different door has opened. Then I opened my laptop, typed 3 words into the reply field. I accept. Not for the title, not for the power, but because I understood something clearly now. Every system needs a gatekeeper, and this time I'll be on the right side of the door. 3 months later, I sat in an office with no glass walls, no city view, and no nameplate on the door. Pale gray walls, a simple wood-laminated desk, and a soft desk lamp casting just enough light to read deeply without straining my eyes. I had no assistant, no Monday morning briefings, no one needed to introduce me to visitors. But each week, 3 to 5 files landed on my desk. IPO submissions from tech companies, big and small, rising and established, each confidently pitching a future beyond regulatory reach. I read every line. I didn't skim. I didn't skip over footnotes. I wasn't looking for lies. I was looking for the trace of someone who thought they were clever enough to outmaneuver the system. Last week, I reviewed a valuation report from an AI startup pegged at $800 million. One budget line caught my eye, labeled Auxiliary Growth Fund with a vague investment roadmap. I circled the entry and attached a comment. Verify funding recipient in Series C round. No clear counterparty record in current valuation model. Just that one line. 3 days later, the entire IPO process was paused, pending a full review of their intermediary investment structure. I didn't feel satisfied by that authority. What I felt was balance. A kind of peace that's hard to name. The certainty that if something wasn't clean, it wouldn't pass me unmarked. Someone from the legal division once asked me, while we waited for the elevator together, "Do you think you're getting justice for Halcyon?" I smiled. No, Halcyon doesn't need me anymore, but the next companies do. I didn't take this seat to reclaim a reputation. I took it because there are things, if I don't stand at the door, no one will. And if I was once quietly removed from the system, then now I've quietly become its gatekeeper. I never needed a chair with my name on it. I just needed to know I was sitting in the right place.